How's it going, everyone? In this video we are going to be comparing the reviews of the Obi-Wan Kenobi television show that just ended. We'll compare it to reviews of other Star Wars shows, movies, but we're not actually going to read a single review. We're just going to plot the audience reviews, audience ratings versus critics reviews, critics ratings, and see what patterns we can detect. Now, right now there's a lot of information going on here, so I'm just gonna remove the labels, or more accurately show you the plot without the labels just to begin with, and then we'll get into the details. And we're not just going to be talking about what this says about the Obi-Wan Kenobi series or Star Wars, but about films in general, because there are some trends that can or maybe can be generalized. So what we're looking at here, we're looking at many Star Wars movies and TV shows, and they are plotted on these axes. On the horizontal, the x-axis, you have positive critics reviews as a percentage. This is taken from Rotten Tomatoes, the percent of critics who gave these movies or TV shows a positive rating. And on the vertical or y-axis, we have the audience positive score as a percentage. Okay, what percentage of audience reviews gave these films or shows a positive rating? Okay, again from Rotten Tomatoes. And every dot is a film or TV show. And right away we see some patterns, right? Not even knowing what movies or shows we're talking about. On the top right corner over here, we see this cluster of productions which are ranked very high by both audience and critics. And then in the middle, we see this cluster which both audience and critics agree these are kind of mediocre productions, like they're okay, but they're not that great. And then we see some points that are kind of on their own, and we'll talk about those as well. So, color-wise, gray is the original trilogy, yellow is the prequel trilogy, red is the sequels, blue are the standalone films, everything else are the TV shows except this one white outlier here, this white circle, that is the Clone Wars movie. And then the diamond here, that's the Obi-Wan Kenobi series that we'll be focusing on. So enter the labels. All right, there's the actual numbers on the side here, by the way. So when we look at this core of highly ranked productions by both audience and critics, right in the top spot there, we have episodes 4 and 5, the original 2 Star Wars films. We have the Clone Wars television show and The Mandalorian right up there with them, right? So these are ranked as something very special by both audience and critics. The last film of the original trilogy, Return of the Jedi, that's right here. Audience liked it a little bit more than critics, but still ranked quite high. Rebels and Episode 7, critics liked it a bit more than audience, but both liked it quite a bit. And then we have Rogue One and The Bad Batch. Critics and audience both liked it, but not quite as much as these 4 highest ranked productions right there. Okay, so before we talk about this cluster in the middle, as I mentioned, the one outlier here ranked quite low by both audience and critics is the Clone Wars movie. Kind of makes me want to see it. Like, if it's so bad, I want to know what's so special about it. And then we have this central cluster right here. So the sequels, actually, the audience ranked, or sorry, the prequels, the audience ranked all of them mediocre. Okay, so around 60% plus or minus, right? So okay, but not that great. Critics actually thought it got better as it progressed. So they ranked episode 1 worse than episode 2, which they ranked as mediocre, and then they ranked episode 3 as pretty good, actually, higher than episode 2. The others in this mediocre clump here where audience and critics agree are Book of Boba Fett, Solo, and the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. Okay, before we get into that, I'll just mention the sequel trilogy. Some strange phenomena happening. Episode 8, critics ranked it really well, okay, above 90%, which puts it in the same category as this golden core here, okay? first two Star Wars movies plus Clone Wars and The Mandalorian, audience really disagreed. Audience ranked it just above 40%. So critics loved it. Audiences really did not like it. Episode 9, it's the other way around. So the audience thought it's in the high 70s, whereas the critics ranked it as just above 50%. So quite a lot of inconsistency there with the sequel trilogy. That's noteworthy. So Obi-Wan Kenobi, right there in the middle, in that central mediocre cluster. Audience and critics agree, around mid-60s. It's okay. Not that great. About 2 out of 3 people liked it. We don't know how much. 1 out of 3 people didn't like it. We don't know how much. Very, very similar to Solo. Now that's an interesting comparison because Obi-Wan Kenobi and Solo are both post-Disney purchase of Star Wars. They both very much play on the nostalgia. They take a main Star Wars character and tell a new story about them. And both of them ended up being considered like mediocre on both scales. What's also interesting is comparing Obi-Wan to The Mandalorian. Okay, they're both live action television shows. They're both after Disney's purchase of Star Wars. But Obi-Wan Kenobi has a lot of name recognition. Main character, the same actors. So the main character is a main Star Wars character. You have the same actors from previous Star Wars films, the prequel trilogy. So there's a lot of name recognition there. Mandalorian has none of that. Okay, it's a new character. The actors are, well, they're known actors, but they're not these huge names that a lot of people would watch it just because it's that actor. You don't see the main character's face most of the time. So despite that lack of name recognition, that lack of playing on nostalgia, Mandalorian does much, much better in the eyes of both critics and audience, which tells you that name recognition, playing on nostalgia, it's not enough. If it has any effect, it's not enough of a positive effect, maybe even a negative effect, because people expect certain things because they know the character, and if you don't do it right, people just don't like it. Who knows? So those are interesting comparisons. Now, this is all from Rotten Tomatoes. We're also going to look at the same kind of information, but from Metacritic. Okay, so these are the Metacritic scores. Again, first without the labels. So again, you have the critics' reviews as a percentage on the x-axis, and on the y-axis you have the average audience score out of 10. The patterns aren't as obvious here, but I'll still go through them to point it out. So in the top spot again here, we have these 2 films that really stand out, and you can probably guess which ones. Then we have this diagonal line. Okay, so this is interesting because along this line, audience and critics pretty much agree that films get better as you move along this line. Then we have some other dots on the side of this line, which are really kind of part of the same pattern, just a little bit to the side. And then we have an outlier right here, an outlier right here, and this formation right here. These are productions that the audience really liked, and critics thought that they were not so great. So let's bring in the labels. So top spot, no surprises. Again, the first 2 Star Wars films ranked very high by both audience and critics. These 3 here that audience really liked, critics thought they're okay, maybe not that great. Was Return of the Jedi, Clone Wars, and The Mandalorian. So again, this is that core from what we saw on Rotten Tomatoes. The prequel trilogy. So the critics thought it was pretty bad. Audience thought it was okay, but not so great. That's the first 2 films. The third film of the prequels, actually both audience and critics thought it was pretty good. Audience liked it a bit more. Looking at the sequel trilogy, in general, the rankings are lower here than on Rotten Tomatoes. What we see, though, interestingly, is a lot of disagreement. So the critics thought episodes 7 and 8 was really good, on the same level of the first 2 Star Wars films. Audiences did not agree with that. Episode 7 they thought was okay, but not so great. Episode 8 they thought was awful. And they also thought that about episode 9. Now, the critics also thought episode 9 was quite bad. I mean, audience liked it even less than the critics. So that's certainly a difference of, well, between Metacritic and Rotten Tomatoes, and we see that strong disagreement, especially with episode 8, between audience and critics. The Clone Wars movie, again, we see it as an outlier on its own, ranked pretty bad by audience and critics, although critics liked it even less. And so here are these films that audience and critics pretty much agree on in increasing order. We have episode 9, and then what they think is a bit better is Book of Boba Fett, a bit better Solo, a bit better Bad Batch, a bit better Obi-Wan Kenobi. Again, audience put it in the high 60s, critics in the low 70s, so it was okay, not that great. Same result as the Rotten Tomato scores. And then Rebels, audience and critics thought it was pretty good, not amazing, but pretty good. Interestingly enough, Rogue One, there was a slight disagreement, not much. Audience put it in the high 7s. I think I said high 70s, high 60s before. Audience score is out of 10 here, not out of 100. So yeah, Rogue One, audience thought it was quite good. Critics thought it was okay, not that great, but still, it's kind of in that mediocre range. So here, Obi-Wan Kenobi is not really close to any particular point. If we compare it to Solo, actually, it's considered better than Solo. If we compare it to The Mandalorian, so critics put it pretty much in the same range. Critics even put Obi-Wan Kenobi a little bit better than The Mandalorian, not that much better, but audience still consider Mandalorian much better. Okay, we're talking high 6s versus mid 8s. Okay, think of it as like high 60% versus mid 80s in terms of percentage. So again, interesting comparison. What's another interesting general conclusion here is, let's say someone has not seen any of these movies. They don't know anything about these movies other than what the titles are. Just by looking at this data, okay, they can see that, okay, well, there's something special, really special about the original trilogy and the Clone Wars and the Mandalorian. Okay, you just show them these data points. They say, okay, yeah, there's really something special about these films or TV shows. Everything else is kind of mediocre. It's okay, not that great. And something weird is happening with the sequel trilogy, right? The reviews are all over the place. There's inconsistencies, strong disagreements, and they can conclude that just by looking at the data. Without even having watched the films, without even having read the reviews, they can make that conclusion just from the data. And of course, that's actually, if you have read the reviews on all of these, and you know the cultural impact of these films, then that actually is the reality as well, and the data shows that. Well, that's the generally average, so to speak, reality. Not everyone agrees, for example, right? People have different views as to what the films are, but in general, that is the kind of common consensus. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you next time.